You're listening to Two Beers Until Phronesis, a philosophy podcast by students and graduates. Whether you've never heard of philosophy or have a philosophy PhD, we hope you enjoy these conversations as we discuss some of life's big questions over a few beers. Enjoy! So, a lot of people who have a passing knowledge of philosophy would have probably come across the phrase, I think therefore I am, or in its Latin, cogito ergo sum, or in its French, je pense donc je suis. There you go.
Emphasis on the ponce.
But a lot of people don't really get what it means, or maybe, there's a lot more to it than I think therefore I am. So we're going to talk a little bit about Descartes, the French philosopher, because he's a good starting point for people who've never really had much contact with philosophy.
He's considered the father of contemporary philosophy, of modern day philosophy. So during the kind of the Enlightenment period, he brought about these ideas of infallibilism kind of thing, and I think therefore I am kind of spawned from that. So to give kind of a basic explanation of what he means by I think therefore I am, is that all he can really know is that he's a thinking thing. Anything other than that is kind of an assumption.
It comes from a deep distrust of everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
So just to give some context, basically these ideas of Descartes came from his meditations, in which he basically locked himself away in a room and sat there until he'd finished these meditations. And he goes through a series of self-doubt. So he makes a load of statements, totally refutes them all, doubts everything, and then eventually comes out of that.
Yeah, the first of which being, well, how can I know anything around me is real? He goes, well, because of my senses. And then he says, well, but my senses can be fooled, but I'm thinking, so I can't doubt that at least something is thinking, and that's me. I think, therefore I am. And yeah, I like it. It's really nice to read. I mean, well, as far as philosophical texts from that era go, it's nice to read because it's got this really informal feel to it. It's got the stream of consciousness thing. He even at the end of one of the chapters, he says some shit like, "Oh yeah, I'm tired now, so I'm gonna go to bed."
Yeah.
But yeah, it's in a lot of ways it's what philosophy should be, and I think that's why a lot of people are so familiar with that phrase and with what it means.
This stems from his perception of the human body and mind. Descartes believes that the body and the mind are two completely separate things.
Yeah, the idea of Cartesian duality.
Yeah.
The mind-body split.
So, I think it's good to start with the I think therefore I am, because his ideas progress from one another. So we've got the distrust, we've got the I'm completely distrustful of everything, but I understand that I am distrustful, so I must be thinking, so I can't distrust that I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And what am I then? So I'm a thinking thing.
The most fundamental point, all we can really say without any doubt is that I exist.
Yeah.
What I is up for question, because all we can know is that I am a thinking thing. Whether we have limbs or anything like that, whether we have a physical body, again, we can be fooled by our senses.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Well, he tries to bring everything back from this small, because this is pretty much just his starting point. I think therefore I am, and from that he's under the impression that he brings everything back. He doesn't, because it's a very, very flimsy argument that gets knocked down by his predecessors straight away. Yeah, I mean, it basically, in the rest of the meditations, it goes something like, God's probably real somehow.
God wouldn't deceive me.
Yeah, God's not a deceiver. Yeah, because I think he mathematically proves God with just his mind.
Yeah,
it's a reformulation of the ontological argument. Ontology being the dealing with the definition of things, what things are. So, by God's very nature, in a kind of abstract way, he sort of proves God to be real through his thoughts.
Which becomes cyclical, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's the Cartesian circle.
Yeah, it's not a very good argument, and the most interesting thing about Descartes is the questions that he frames, which still haven't been satisfyingly answered, which is like most philosophers, it's more about the questions rather than the solutions.
Definitely.
So he sees I'm a thinking thing as true. He looks at his surroundings and thinks, oh, so what's my body? What does that mean? What relationship does my mind have with my body and by extension the surrounding world? So he sees his own body as something completely separate. So he suggests that without the body, the mind would still live on.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks that thoughts, and your thoughts in particular, will live on without the body. So that even brings in like after death scenarios. You can extend his opinions to that.
Yeah, in sixth form I was taught Descartes alongside the philosophy of religion. It was part of
as was I.
yeah, it was we were learning at the same time exactly the same lessons. We were taught shit about the soul in Hinduism, like the Atman and the samsara and the reincarnation and stuff. It was like different views on the soul. It was basically an afterlife theory as far as my teachers were concerned. 3 years ago, I studied Kuhn, Thomas Kuhn.
Spy. International man of mystery.
Thomas Kuhn.
I like where you started though. I like with the just straight in 3 years ago I started Kuhn.
Yeah.
So that was good. But then it evolved.
Then I said, Kuhn, Thomas Kuhn.
Like a complete flat.
Shaken not
I studied Thomas Kuhn 3 years ago. And you guys would have studied him 1 year ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't he one of the most quoted people within the humanities?
Yeah.
So he wrote a book called Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
You got it?
Yeah. And when did he write that?
60s.
60s?
I want to say 60s, but I feel like that's wrong. Was that right? 62.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look at me go.
So I think where he starts is applying modern day ideas to Aristotle. So
He was a lecturer.
yes, he was a physician, so it's a
Mhm.
good start. So he started off teaching science, and so which kind of gives him a better mandate to talk about the history of science.
Do you mean
than
a
philosopher.
Do you mean a physicist?
Yeah.
What
can
did
I
you
say?
say?
You said a physician.
Thanks, Red Stripe.
That was his excuse. Yeah, so he was a physicist, I think.
Yeah, he was a physicist, and
He was struggling with critiquing Aristotle, I think it was. What is a trend when people talk about ancient history is they seem to think that the smart people of that time were actually stupid.
Yeah, they seem to they take history as a linear succession, and that we're smarter now than we were then.
Yeah, they go, well, Aristotle said this, but really is a bit of an idiot because
Yeah.
that's not the case.
definitely. Well, there is one exception when Aristotle says that a spider has 6 legs. No, not 6 legs. Wait, how many?
8. They have
got
8.
Yeah, they have it. Yeah, yeah. The reaction I got then was like, wait, shit, do they? Started that myself now.
I said physician a minute ago.
Yeah.
My fucking life is over.
Thomas Kuhn is a physician.
So he's realising, actually, no, they're not stupid. You're looking at it anachronistically.
Yeah.
So that's his starting point. So he sees Aristotle as living in a different world.
Yeah, so he does away with this idea of progression.
Yeah.
And it tries to destroy the idea of linear history.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, is an argument against this idea of a cumulative progression of ideas, and that science is building on other sciences, and knowledge within science is a perfect progression from start to finish.
Yeah.
You're advancing every time.
So rather than advancing from one theory to the next, he thinks it's paradigmatic.
Mm-hmm.
That you have that there are certain paradigms within science, such as heliocentrism or Newton's laws
Einstein.
and Einstein, and with each of these ideas, we have to operate under them, and until they no longer work, and we have to. It's akin to a kind of real revolution, political revolution.
So his notion of paradigms, although paradigms was obviously a word before he coined it, when you talk about a paradigm, you're talking about Kuhn's concept of a paradigm.
He coined the term paradigmatic shift.
Yes.
But not paradigm,
Yeah. Even though he specifically targets science, you can apply it to culture.
Mm-hmm.
Paradigm shifts that happened in the 60s, you're talking about the same kind of paradigm shift. So ideas have been abandoned, no ideas are in place, and up until the point when those ideas are abandoned, you're in that world, you're in that paradigm.
Yeah, and to break out of that paradigm, there needs to be a revolution in order to do so. So, like, fundamentally, what establishes that paradigm, its grounding, has to be undone or proved wrong. But that can only be done after it's demonstrably untrue. So, there start to, holes start to appear, and they get wider and wider.
Should we talk about the heliocentric model? Is the easiest way of talking about how.
So the Earth revolves around the sun.
Yeah, this is Aristotle.
Yeah.
Suggesting that the Earth was the centre of the universe.
Yeah.
Is the geocentric model.
So that's what Ptolemy thought, which is geocentric. Yeah.
My bad. Obviously, it's not.
Yeah.
Right, it's not. But up until Galileo started publishing documents saying this isn't the case.
Yeah, Galileo and Copernicus. Yeah.
This is the accepted truth for everyone.
This was what was known as truth.
This is the truth.
Yeah, but I think so. The main point that Kuhn wants to make is that science isn't necessarily concerned with what's true, and this is what gets Kuhn a lot of flack within the scientific community, even though he's a physicist himself. I was going to say physician. But yeah, science doesn't care what's metaphysically true. Science cares what's functional.
Yeah, exactly.
So before, when we had the Ptolemaic model or Aristotelian model of the universe, that the Earth was the centre and the world was flat. Thanks for that visual prop of your outstretched hand indicating the world is flat.
Have you not heard the new donut theory? That's exciting.
Yeah.
There's a donut theory.
Let's not get into that.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that worked.
Yeah.
That's the important thing. It's not.
They built equations out of.
Yeah, and maps. The cartography and everything worked based on that theory.
But then Galileo comes around, Copernicus comes around.
Yeah, Copernican Revolution.
They realise actually it's not the case. They've used their telescopes, looked at the stars, figured out what planet is it.
It was Uranus.
Enough about that. That's
I'll stop at you.
Instead of circling the Earth, it's going erratically.
Yeah.
So obviously it's not circling the Earth, it's circling the Sun. So even though Galileo has punctured this massive hole in the theory
In
Uranus, hundreds of years pass until it's accepted that.
Yeah, just because there's one kind of small hole in the theory doesn't mean that science is going to say, shit, there's a hole in the theory, let's start again. A lot of what Kuhn is saying is that there is a huge number of anomalies in the scientific theory, but they simply get ignored for a very long time.
Yeah, just like with the revolution,
yeah.
You have to have a majority overturning the government before. You always have dissenters, and going back to science, this is how the whole retesting of evidence against a theory. It's only when the evidence mounts up. So yeah, this really isn't a criticism of science. Kuhn is a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
He's not. What he's criticising is the idea that science is
infallible.
Yeah, and an objective truth.
Yes.
Which I don't know how many people believe that, but I think there are some people in the scientific community, especially the way that the language revolves around that. Going back to
it's not scientific, so it's not true.
Yeah. New atheism often.
Yeah.
It gets accused of that.
But the idea that scientists are real people, and scientists will, to get approval from other scientists, will change their theories so that they correlate with general assumptions.
Yeah.
And practically, they won't get funded if they come up with some loopy idea that the world is made of jelly.
To that, what's important is that scientists within their paradigm see the paradigm. Well, they don't see the paradigm; it's invisible to them. So as far as they're concerned, they're working towards this greater idea of science as a whole.
Of knowing everything.
Exactly. So they don't understand that they're in a paradigm They believe that they're on a staircase up to the ultimate truth. So
But it's only when they start
it's
seeing
only when the
anomalies,
paradigm starts to break down that they realise they're in a paradigm.
when things start not working out, when someone tests and retests and goes through the whole scientific method, comes up with something that doesn't quite work, and enough of that happens for people to realise, actually,
We need to start this
we
again.
need to think of something else.
Mhm.
When the paradigm becomes visible, that's when
That's when
that's
they
the
break
end of
them down.
paradigm.
Yeah, and one criticism of Kuhn is that he only gives examples of 2 or 3 paradigms. And I think they are Einstein, Newton, and Aristotle.
If I remember correctly, he does talk about mini revolutions.
Yes.
Yeah, he talks about light quite a lot in terms of photons. I think there's a paradigm shift between light as a particle, light as a wave, and then light as a photon.
Yeah.
And phlogiston, he talks a lot about.
Yeah.
Phlogiston.
Jesus.
Phlogiston is the idea that there's the
Something
reason
is combustible has an element that makes it combustible.
Yeah, there's a thing within objects that burns. That's phlogiston, and the reason why objects burn more is because they have more phlogiston. It worked.
Yeah,
It did work.
Yeah.
If you've not thought that oxygen is combustible, up until that point, you'll be thinking, yeah, of course there is
It's got
something.
more phlogiston.
Yeah, this match
Makes sense.
full of phlogiston.
Because I mean, when we're talking on a very brought back level, we're dealing with like theoretical models. We're not dealing with anything we can tangibly see. A lot of science, especially when we get into quantum shit, is largely theoretical anyway. And it was theoretical back then, and it's theoretical now. I mean, I'm embarrassing myself a little bit.
We're not scientists.
Yeah, if you haven't worked that out yet, we're not.
Yeah.
This is the philosophy of science.
Yeah. So you don't have to know science. No, most philosophers of science know science. Bit of a segue from that, but related to that point. Who's the guy in the wheelchair?
It's Hawking.
Stephen Hawking. He
Rest in peace.
rest in peace. Yeah. Stephen Hawking wrote a book, and he wrote several books. But at the start of one of them, he says philosophers have failed to, produce anything meaningful or true about the universe, and scientists have picked up the mantle, and now they're answering the questions that philosophers couldn't. What the fuck does that mean? What does that mean? They're 2 different disciplines.
But it's this kind of... Aristotle thought he was nearly at the point of knowing everything.
Yep.
Until someone came around and thought,
Spiders have
8 legs.
8 legs.
Yeah.
I think what's important for me in getting my head around Kuhn and getting my head around the fact that science isn't all what it seems is that, well, first we need to define necessary and contingent.
Yeah.
So when something is necessary, it is always the case, no matter the circumstance. So to say that, again, this is assuming some things, but to say 2 + 2 is 4 is necessary. No matter 2 pens plus 2 pens equals 4 pens. So no matter what way you shape it, 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah.
But things that are contingent are to say that today is a Thursday. If you say today's Thursday tomorrow, it's not. So which would be a contingent fact. So it's correct now, but might not be correct tomorrow or yesterday. And science is the same. Science is not necessary. So for Aristotle to come up with his theories, he came up with those theories because of a certain number of factors. If you go to an alternate universe, it is not a necessary fact that Aristotle will come out with this theory and then the Copernican Revolution would happen later on. Science is not necessary in a linear sense like that. They're all contingent ideas.
Yeah, they rely on
the circumstance.
Yeah.
They're all historically determined.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways our lecturer used to phrase it was the modern conception of scientists as people who sort of boffins who aren't human. These really inhuman people that just walk along beaches going, oh, look at that evidence just washed up. Like, there's a bit of evidence to support my theory. No, they're already looking for. Evidence isn't driftwood. It's something that they're actively seeking.
They're searching for something to fit their own preconception.
Yeah, which sort of goes in the face of this idea that they're really not, and that they're searching for
ultimate truth.
Yeah. Or something to disprove their theory, which they are, but they're hoping that doesn't happen, and they'll largely ignore those facts until they can't.
Yeah. Because if they find something that completely disproves years of work, they're not going to go, oh well, are they? They're going to
No,
try
they're
and avoid that at all costs.
I think Kuhn discusses as well the practical sense that a lot of time and money is spent on researching a particular theory. So they're not going to simply cast it aside at the first anomaly. Scientists are invested in their own theory and they're going to stick with it as long as they can.
They're going to dismiss as many anomalies as they can.
Until a revolution starts.
Yeah.
I mean, we should probably clarify what we mean by ultimate truth. We're talking about truth with a capital T.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that this uncapitalized lowercase truth isn't useful. It fucking is. Like, it's the best kind of truth out there. Unless you're talking about mathematical truth. Everything is contingent except for these very few necessary things, like 2 + 2 = 4. But it is the best kind of contingent truth, and I don't think Kuhn would argue against that. But what he's saying is, it's not up there with, I don't know, the kinds of things that Plato was talking about with forms and things, or the religious truth. It's not the truth. It's susceptible to change, and I think most scientists would probably, or hopefully, agree with that.
I think the thing to bear in mind as well is we're not dismissing science.
Yeah.
Right? Science cures cancer, right? Science does progress within its paradigm, but it's the kind of fetishism that is put towards scientists as knowing everything, right? They know the truth,
Yeah.
capital T. It produces results, but you've got to realise at the same time these people are human, they existed within their time, and at some point in the future, someone's going to look at us and laugh and think, oh, you're stupid.
You can basically sum it up by saying it's an argument against thinking anachronistically. It's an argument against the idea of ultimate truth and progressivism in the sense of knowledge, which I think is not dismissing science.
Happy Guy Fawkes.
Yeah. When are we recording
3 days ago.
Yeah, the 8th, so yeah.
Science isn't a mountain of knowledge that someone's putting on the pile.
Are we still doing this whilst Joe's having a piss?
Yeah, fuck Joe.
Okay, so Joe, would you like to explain what normal science is and revolutionary science is?
Normal science is science that exists within a paradigm, right? Am I right?
I think so.
So if we take Newton and gravity, okay, we all know Newton's idea that gravity bloody exists because of the apple stuff.
Yeah, we know
One example I could think of normal science within that is that with the absence of gravity, a hammer and a feather dropped at the same height at the same time would land at the same time, right? That's normal science because it exists using the ideas developed by Newton.
Yeah.
That exists within the paradigm, right? Am I right?
Yes,
Am I
yeah.
right?
So
Back me up, guys.
So you're using established paradigmatic rules and things, yeah. Like, what's that thing you used in science classes? You got that little. I don't know why I'm hand gesturing to you on a podcast.
I'm not sure what this gesture is either. For those of you listening, it's not useful.
Right, it's like a weight thing. You hold it like that, thermometer type thing. With a hook on the bottom.
Yeah.
You dangle things off it,
Yeah.
and you sort of hold it, and it goes. It's Newtonomer. It weighs newtons.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's like a syringe, but
Yes.
Yeah, I got you. Like it's got a spring in it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's a Newton meter,
Yeah. Okay.
Newtometer.
Newtometer.
I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Citation needed.
Carry on with that.
So yeah, you're using. We really aren't scientists, are we?
A Newton meter is the correct.
I got a
correct
C in my GCSE science. So.
I got an
Yeah, that's how you remember a Newtometer.
I got a B.
And I haven't thought about
A.
it
You got a
for.
D.
I haven't thought about that for at least 5 years.
Yeah. But yeah, so the point I was trying to make is you have established rules of measurement.
Yeah.
You're going off
Yeah.
it's pre-established things. Aristotle's view was that objects fall faster because they love the ground more, which still works.
Essentially, yeah.
Which still works. You know, the difference, the outcome's the same depending on how the rules work. The difference really is just the language he's applying to it. But then, yeah, obviously there come points where that starts to falter because the language isn't sufficient to describe what's actually happening.
But clearly, nearly all science reaffirms a paradigm, but then you get on to
Revolutionary science.
revolutionary science.
Do we have any examples? Paranormal stuff? Does that count? 'Cause that's bollocks.
That's just bollocks.
Yeah, that's just weird.
Sorry, Derek Acora.
Have you seen the Michael Jackson seance?
No.
It's the best thing you'll ever see.
I used to do seances.
It's
Did you?
Derek
Yeah.
Acora after the passing of MJ round a table with just people who like Michael Jackson. No one that important. Just fans of Michael Jackson.
Right.
And then Derek Acora
Yeah.
gets possessed by Michael Jackson. And he's like, I love you. Thank you for listening to my music. And like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was live on Sky One. So people were
dear.
texting in.
Derek Acora was the guy who was in Most Haunted, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he
I
was
feel a presence.
exposed as a fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they had the camera rolling, and he goes, "Funny," and they all burst out laughing. It's like an outtake
Yeah.
because he's basically making up this something called Fanny, and they're all like laughing about it, and he's going, "It's bollocks, isn't it? All these fucking mugs." And it's on YouTube. And you just like, just typing Derek Acora Fanny.
Right, that bit's getting cut out
Yeah.
or given to the Patreon.
Yeah.
I don't know what counts as revolutionary. Galileo, right?
Copernican Revolution.
Copernican
yeah.
Revolution.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
like the
It is, yeah.
yeah. Go on, joke and girl. That took like place over 100 years at least, didn't it? The revolution.
It was a long time, yeah.
Oh,
The way Kuhn describes it is a leap of faith. So it takes a certain number of people from the old paradigm to take a leap of faith into the new paradigm. So it's kind of a shot in the dark. So they don't really know where science is heading. Their old paradigm is kind of failing. So they jump into the new one with the hope that it's going to answer their questions.
Mm.
So the Copernican Revolution, he studied the planet Uranus. I made sure to say the planet Uranus.
yeah.
It didn't help you.
And somehow it still didn't help me. He saw the way it was changing in the sky seemed erratic, and that it didn't fit the notion that it was orbiting us. And through a series of other discoveries, as it's quite clear we're not scientists, so I'm not 100% clear on this, but it became clear that Uranus wasn't circling the Earth, wasn't orbiting the Earth. Therefore, there must be another point in the solar system which is central. And then he said that the Sun is central, that the heliocentric theory came about, and that things orbited the Sun instead of the Earth. And that theory seemed to work better than things orbiting the Earth. So even now, to say that things orbiting the Sun in the heliocentric theory is correct, we just assume that to be the truth. But who's to say that that might change in 50 years' time? Because it might.
So the point of revolutionary science is that it has to directly contradict
The
normal
current paradigm.
Right, yeah, so I've just been looking back at my essay, and there's this critique that normal science is not particularly normal, because revolutionary science also happens on a consistent level. Revolutions are a natural part of the way things
the cycle.
will play out. Yeah, cycles. There's this argument of aren't revolutions just a normal part of paradigmatic structure as well?
It's hard to describe it without saying the word progress, because Kuhn would throttle me to death. But for science to
Work
for it to
as science is intended to.
function,
Yeah.
it would have to break apart and start again. Something paradigm.
Futurama.
Something edit this.
No, that's Family Guy. Something dark side.
Oh, you got it. Something dark side.
Something complete. I don't know anything about how Karl Popper relates to this, so you better explain.
Basically, Karl Popper says that a scientific theory isn't necessarily scientific until it can be falsified.
So the opposite to verification.
Yes.
So yeah, generally the accepted idea is that a scientific theory has to be verified.
Or be falsifiable. So essentially, if a theory is to be scientific, it has to be able to be disproved. And therefore he kind of argues for the linear method of science, that a theory is put in place, and then if it is falsifiable, evidence is given against it. If it can counter that evidence, then it remains a true part of science. If it's falsified, then we disband from that theory, kind of leave that aside and move on to the next better theory, which is what Kuhn is arguing against.
My experience of Karl Popper and falsification comes from, if I can't prove your stupid God argument false, then it doesn't stand. Like if someone says, "Oh, there's a unicorn behind you, but only I can see it," and you've got no way of disproving that.
I've mentioned this before, that there's an elephant in the room,
Yeah.
but every time you look, it moves.
Yeah.
You can't disprove that. Right?
And another similar example is Bertrand Russell's teapot floating around Saturn. He says there's a teapot floating around Saturn, but you've got no way of knowing that, so it may as well be false. It's an argument against, because a lot of people say, well, God could be real, you've got no way of disproving that. I was like, well, I've got no reason to think of it as true either, so it may as well be the teapot floating around Saturn, because there's so little evidence for it. Whatever can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And today we're going to talk about Plato's Republic, and I'm again joined by Joe and Joe.
Right. Joe.
Hello. I thought he spoke for both of us.
We should probably start by introducing a few things about the book, about Plato, and about during the narrative of the book, Plato uses Socrates, who in real life was his teacher. There's a little bit more to it than that. Obviously explain various parts of the book and ideas that he uses, and what the Republic actually is, what the forms are. I think this is the book where the idea of the cave first appears. Do you guys want to?
Yeah, well, it basically revolves around... It's a narrative around Socrates, who was obviously mentioned as Plato's teacher. And who else is he with? It's not...
He's with a bunch of generals and...
Drunken and...
Yeah.
And they're going to a feast, and he starts off with the question, what is it to be good?
Mm-hmm.
So that the whole book is Plato writing as Socrates, talking to other people,
Yeah.
sharing their ideas about what's
Yeah, he's kind of using Socrates as a bit of a puppet, as a mouthpiece for his own kind of ideas.
Yeah, which is something that Plato does in his later dialogues. You've got early dialogues where, like the trial of Socrates, I think it's called, the death of Socrates.
Should we edit this bit so you just say it right first time?
So you've got earlier dialogues like the last days of Socrates, where he uses...
That was nothing what you said. the trial, the death.
Last days.
Alright, so you've got earlier...
Okay, right. Okay.
I don't even know if this is right. So yeah, you've got earlier dialogues where Socrates is being used as a historical figure. He's actually, Plato's giving a historical account of what Socrates did in things like the last days of Socrates, which is about the death of Socrates. And then in later dialogues, Plato starts to come into his own more, and Socrates appears as this kind of character, which is really what he's doing in the Republic and other books like the Symposium, where he's just a mouthpiece, as you said, for Plato's ideas.
So they're literally coming across people.
Yeah, and it's people like politicians and generals, because Socrates has this thing, especially the character of Socrates, but it's also true of the real Socrates, of sort of going up to important people and pissing them off and asking them really complex questions like what is good, because usually these people are in positions of power, so he likes to sort of get them to really think, are they the people they think they are?
If you've not read a dialogue before, it's helpful to understand that he's only he's communicating his ideas through the conversations that these characters are having. They might be based on real people, but
yeah, they're representations.
They're representations. So basically, all the people that come across him and argue with his point, the only reason for them being there is to stop other people criticising his ideas.
Yeah.
So he's just cutting off any possible contention that he may face later.
When you look at philosophy, particularly in an A-level concept, in an A-level context in the textbook, you'll get an argument, and then you'll be given a counter to that argument, and then an argument back. So what Plato's doing in his works is he's given a dialogue, so there is no case for the counter-argument. He's given the argument and the counter-argument in his own works.
And resolved the counter-argument.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's basically countering his opponents before they have a chance to object to him.
And by the end of it, you've got an amalgamation of loads of different points that he's taken from other people to form his one idea.
Yeah, I mean, one criticism of the way he does this is he presents his counter-arguments as being particularly weak.
Yeah, he strawmans people.
In some cases, yeah, he does strawman them.
But that's a criticism of just him as a character. The characteristics of Plato. I think
Yeah.
the way he comes across in the book, from my personal opinion, he's so sassy. He's so like, just, oh, so you mean this? When really, that's not what they said. One of my, shall we move on to Thrasymachus or
Thrasymachus, yeah.
right? I say Thrasymachus. It's ancient Greek, but we can do
Which one of them represents? Is it Sophism?
Thrasymachus, right?
Yeah, yeah.
His so Plato at the start is like, what is good? What does it mean to be living in a society where you're acting well, like your actions are good actions? But it kind of evolves this into, okay, so what would make the perfect society? What would make the best, goodest society?
The most good.
The most good society. So he comes across this character, Thrasymachus, right? Thrasymachus, whatever you want to say. Thrasymachus, what? And you can say whatever you want, right? Thrasymachus, I'm just going to call him Thrasymachus, says what is right is what the state says is right. So whoever is ruling you, whatever they say is right, is right. And obviously, for my personal opinion, I think that's true, because the implication of what he's saying is that there is no such thing as what is right. It's completely arbitrary.
Is he actually saying it's arbitrary, or is he saying, is it more nuanced than that? Is he actually saying the collective power of a state should always be obeyed, and that's objectively good? Or is he actually just saying it doesn't matter, but you have to do this because it's the law?
I've always read it as it doesn't matter.
Right.
But I can see where you're coming from, where objectively whoever's in control of you is right.
Yeah.
But I've always read him as being critical of that, being critical of like the divine right or whatever of whoever's in charge of you.
Yeah.
But that's just my reading of it. But Plato, not easily, he just dismisses him.
Yeah.
He's just like, well, no, and moves on with that.
Yeah, he basically says that the state is not this infallible power.
Yeah.
That the state makes mistakes at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So to say that what the state says is good is just ridiculous.
Yeah. But for me, I don't think that correctly argues against Thrasymachus, because I've always taken it as Thrasymachus as being cynical.
Thrasymachus is abstracting more.
Yeah.
He's not literally saying that the state is what is right. He's being critical of the state in saying that what the state says goes. But he's kind of saying that in a sarcastic sense.
Yeah. But Plato goes, oh right, but the state can be wrong, so they can't be right in this sense. The state may say something that's detrimental to the state, and then he like...
Yeah, the point being that Thrasymachus doesn't actually offer any alternative, while Plato tries to.
Yeah. Yeah. But because of that, Plato thinks, alright, I've dismissed you now.
Yeah, well, so I always used to read Thrasymachus as being like this, typical statesman, soldier bloke. He represents the sort of authoritarian, utilitarian, do what the state says. But yeah, the more readings you have of it, the more you gain a sense of nuance. Because I think, give a bit of historical context, I think they were friends.
I'm sure they were.
Plato and him. But they even end the conversation in the dialogue as friends. They gain a proper understanding. They start off being really sassy to each other, and then they especially
in Plato's description of Thrasymachus, he's like,
well,
he's bursting at the seams trying to counter my argument of what is good, and he's like, oh, I'm so smart, Plato, which I think, I don't know, that's my critical opinion of Plato is that he's just a bit of a dick towards through Socrates. He was a bit of a dick.
Yeah, this is the thing. How much of it is just him using the character of Socrates and accentuating a lot of what Socrates was like the whole, this image of this philosopher in barefoot who had nothing, who would go up to princes and kings and generals and sort of have a go at them and tell them their life was worth nothing. How much is he playing on that, and how much is he... Because Plato didn't do half the stuff that Socrates did, yet Socrates continues to be like we know him through all the accounts in Plato's dialogues. Plato was fairly chilled. Have some more Old Rosie.
That's good. Well, should we get on to...
Philosopher Kuhn?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, so eventually Plato gets onto this idea of the Republic, and there's this relationship between the inner self and the ordering of one's own personality and thoughts, and with the ordering of this utopia, which he calls the Republic. And one of the ideas I think that interests the three of us most is the idea of the philosopher king that rules this Republic. And it's interesting because you get a lot more of Plato's obvious elitism coming in here. Do you guys want to talk about that?
So basically his idea of the philosopher king is that the only person who could possibly rule over a society is a philosopher, because a philosopher is the only person who is of sound enough mind, has got enough kind of rounded idea of life, and has examined life to a good enough extent where they can make these decisions that can affect a whole society. And that is really quite arrogant, obviously. Coming from a philosopher saying a philosopher is the only person who can make these kind of decisions. But he puts philosophers at such kind of a high level. Joe?
Well, yeah, his whole idea is, rather than a democracy, you want a meritocracy. So you want someone or a council of people who are best suited for the job, and he, in his...
And it is a meritocracy
egotistical.
Based on his definitions, though.
Yeah, but being egotistical, he's like, well, obviously philosophers are best suited for the job of ruling everyone. So they're gonna...
The idea of what a philosopher was back then was a little bit more broad, I guess, from how we see it. Well, philosophy as a subject, at least, it entailed, the sciences and maths and things. I mean, he thought you had to study maths for like 8 years before.
And then wasn't it like physical education as well?
Yeah, it was loads of shit. So he thought basically a philosopher wasn't just a philosopher; they were a perfect human.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense, but yeah, it basically boils down to this weird, sort of benevolent dictatorship. It's quite a harsh society by today's standards.
There's a lot of meticulous planning of roles within a society.
Oh yeah, that's right. He has different divisions, doesn't he?
Yeah. So so philosopher king's obviously in charge. Then there's the guardians, if I can remember correctly, that like keep law and order. But then he also talks about the myths that he's going to purposely feed into the society.
Yeah.
About roles, about how I think it's something to do with the blood, what blood's made of. So obviously the philosopher kings will bleed gold. And the guardians will bleed silver.
Yeah, this is where it gets weird.
Yeah, so he what he's trying to push is strict class division.
He's basically faking culture to enforce his ideas using myth.
Mm.
Yeah. So this is where a lot of the critique comes into Plato's Republic. Karl Popper was quite famous for naming him one of the enemies of democracy or something.
He basically compared them to the Nazi regime.
Yeah, because Karl Popper was writing in the 1930s when
this whole thing was going on.
Fascist dictatorships were, Mussolini, Hitler. Within his context, he sees Plato's writing as, he's trying to formulate a government that is fascistic.
Fascistic.
I don't think that's a word.
Fascistic's totally a word.
Okay.
Definitely a word.
Well, we'll make it a word, yeah.
And
yeah, it's interesting because at the height of the Nazi regime, philosophy also had its height.
It did, definitely, yeah.
Philosophers like Heidegger were massive.
Nietzsche was famously, even though he wasn't a Nazi,
he was very against it.
He was branded a Nazi.
But I mean, all intellectuals like Wagner and it's this thing. Philosophy doesn't necessarily mean democracy, which is the sad truth of having this open-ended conversation that is philosophy. You get you get a plurality of different opinions and ideas. But yeah, it is basically this sort of elitist dictatorship that Plato's advocating. But I think that
we do need to see that in context as well, though.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to see that in the context of an ancient Greek setting, because it was never Plato's idea to set out a totalitarian dictatorship.
No,
because there was no totalitarian dictatorship.
He didn't think of the word fascist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, but by the standards of the day, I mean, fascism would have probably been all right compared to they had slavery,
Exactly.
I mean, whilst these guys were having these conversations in the dialogue or in real life, there were slaves waiting on them, and they're talking about being good to all people, and they're coming out with these groundbreaking ethical ideas.
There's a There's a portion of it where he's talking about, for the Guardians at least, who they were there to restore civil order, they could be females. Like, women could have roles.
Oh,
Yeah, women could have roles within leadership, which for that time would have been...
It's pretty revolutionary for that.
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
So-
Plato and Socrates do make a few mentions to women,
Yeah.
like the Delphic Oracle. But yeah, Aristotle hates them. Women were sort of like ovens for.
Oh yeah, and they
Yeah.
weren't women half-baked men.
Yeah, they're like,
yeah, essentially.
They were not fully formed men.
yeah, and they're literally just incubators for babies.
They were passive in
Yeah,
every sense of the word.
yeah,
Like even in procreation,
yeah.
all they did was store it and then.
Yeah, and it's the real relationships to be had are the ones between men and men.
That was a definite ancient Greek theme as well. That the highest form of love was between two men.
Whether it be between two intellectuals or on the battlefield. Or,
Yeah.
So you have to take in the context with everything that Plato's saying.
Yeah, for these guys to be saying anything near this.
For these
their
guys to
time,
mention women
yeah,
is huge.
Yeah, it is massive. Small steps.
So I think it's impossible for Karl Popper to say that, oh, he's Plato's fascist. That's completely, as Vico would say, he's suffering.
Already entered the gratuitous name dropping.
Yeah, he's it's the conceit of scholars. He's reading history as if they thought the same.
Yeah,
as we do.
Being anachronistic.
Yeah, completely anachronistic.
Yeah, I think there's this tendency to look back on philosophers, like people who don't understand philosophy. I think they sometimes assume that when we're talking about Plato, we're just sort of bigging him up as a person, which isn't really the case. Like a lot of people wonder, well, why do you spend so much time talking about Plato if he had all these things wrong with his views? If it is sort of a kind of soft fascism anachronistically, if there are some bad ideas going on here and it's not perfect, why not just start where it starts to get good later on?
But then you're falling short of some point in the future. They're going to be saying that about us. Some point they're going to be saying.
Which is why I think it's more useful to track these ideas from their inception, to go right back to ancient Greece and follow it through. So when we say things like Platonic or Aristotelian, we're talking about not so much, we're not like fetishizing the people themselves. That's the thing with I think a lot of people think that lately they start pulling down statues of people. It's like, well, we're not when we build statues of people and things when we have these kinds of conversations about Plato, we're not fetishizing the people so much as the ideas they represent and their place within the progression of ideas.
It's exactly that. We're talking about a progression that starts with somewhere. We're not holding ancient Greek philosophers like Plato, Aristotle. We're not holding them in such high regard, for their initial ideas, but for what they started.
Yeah.
For where their ideas led to eventually.
We certainly wouldn't want to establish Plato's Republic now.
No.
But we look at it as a kind of time capsule. We see it as, over its time, this is revolutionary. No one else was thinking these same things that Plato was and expressing.
Yeah.
So you've got to take it from the standpoint of it's a marvel within its time.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of democracy, for instance, could be traced back to the way that philosophers and ancient Greeks would talk, where they get a member of the public and he ran like jury duty, and they get him to make laws, or they have a council or whatever. I mean, it's all well and good saying, "Oh, we had democracy before. It's just people being equal," but not quite. Like the very foundations of democracy as we know it today, as a and what it represents in law, comes from ancient Greece. So yeah, it's interesting to see where those ideas come from, and that's the reason why we obsess over books like, well, I don't think obsess is the right word. Why we value books like the Republic and the Symposium and the Leviathan and On Liberty.
Well, from that kind of perspective, you could think that too. You can see a progression in art. The styles have changed. Da Vinci versus Picasso, right? You can see that somewhere in between those two, a lot has changed. But you can still admire them both for what they were doing in their time. I don't know, that's how I kind of view it, because you're still admiring it for what it is rather than what it...
So it has to be taken in the history of the context of it.
Exactly.
And it's probably more interesting to read things you don't agree with than you do agree with. And that's one of the things you really learn from philosophy, or at least you should learn.
It challenges you to make your own point of view stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
The beauty of philosophy is that you're not always going to like it, you're not always going to understand it, but at least you're going to think something about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, right.
The cave thing, right? We have to talk about the cave in the form.
So we talked about the cave, but what we didn't talk about is how that relates to probably one of Plato's most important ideas, which is the forms. This is where Plato starts to get a little bit metaphysical, which is a word you'll probably hear all too often.
The best way to explain it is for an example. So, in Plato's mind, a chair is a good idea. So
you'll always hear the chair.
The chair is
the
the
chair
basic
or your
example.
broil.
Yeah.
The form of the chair, yeah.
So in the world of forms, there is a chair. This is the perfect chair. This is the perfect example of a chair in every single way. The perfect shape, the perfect colour, the perfect support for your back. Anything you can name about a chair, it's the perfect way. And what we have is a representation of that.
The chair.
Correct, it is the chair. So what we see as a chair relates to the chair in the forms, but it is a less perfect version of that. So what we see as a chair, obviously that can mean anything. It can be an office chair, an armchair, anything
All these
like that.
fucking horrible squeaky chairs that we're sat on.
Like this one, you can hear that.
No, but I think what's important is Plato assumes that every time we imagine a chair, we're remembering the chair in the world of the forms.
But slightly worse.
But we can't remember it exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he thinks our souls... I mean, I haven't done this since A-level, but... Because our souls are perfect forms of ourselves, and they previously existed in the world of the forms, which is like this other dimension thing. But
it's like the TARDIS.
Yeah, it's not clear whether he thinks this is a real place metaphysically, or whether it's just an idea. Because none of that. Because he also talks about the form of a bed, but that, a lot of writers have pointed out that might be a joke. I know that there's like forms of ideas, like
this is the form of the good.
The form of the good is the main one, but whether there's a form of every single object in the world of the forms is debatable. But so our souls previously existed in this world, and when we're conceptualizing these ideas, like a chair, it's our souls remembering the perfect idea of a chair. Did you just eat a peanut off the floor?
I dropped it.
Right, okay.
Okay, so it's our souls remembering. Somehow, I don't think he ever really goes into explaining it.
No.
We are reaching into the world of the forms, dragging out...
It's almost a memory, isn't it?
Yeah.
A distant memory.
We're dragging out, going back to the chair, we're dragging out an image of a chair and trying our very best
to recreate
it, but we'll never get there.
Yep.
So, I think the point of the world of the forms...
Because it sounds like just something that's sort of scientifically wrong.
The big problem with talking about the world of forms is that Plato exists, his entire philosophy exists on the assumption that the forms is real.
Yeah.
And that is a big problem. So if you refute the world of forms, you refute...
That's everything.
That's a vast majority of Plato's philosophy.
But I think in relation to the Republic, he's trying to get as close to the form of good as he can possibly get.
Yeah, I mean the form of the good, regardless of like individual objects like beds and chairs, he's more interested in ideas, and he's more interested in the form of the good, which in the allegory of the cave, which is
when you leave the cave,
bunch of guys tied up in a cave, all they see is illusions, shadows on the wall. They break out of the cave, or at least one of them does, and they're blinded by the sun, but they eventually learn their ignorance and realise that they've been seeing illusions their whole life. The sun, in that analogy, is the form of the good.
He's trying to suggest that only through philosophy you will at least get a glimpse
of the forms.
He calls it the real world, but whether you know...
Yeah, this is where a lot of this matrix stuff comes in. It's like, what's real? I mean, yeah, a lot of more grounded philosophers later would, because Plato is definitely one of the most, if not pretty much the most, paradigmatically, one of the most metaphysical philosophers. He relies on the existence of other worlds. He relies on all these almost sort of supernatural concepts, whilst other philosophers take them more figuratively. Or I mean, Aristotle straight after him is a rationalist. He basically births modern science, or at least the precursors of it. But yeah, you rarely find other philosophers that like. There are books like the Timaeus, which is the one in the School of Athens, and the famous picture he's seen carrying. I mean, yeah, that's basically like an argument for God. And his idea of a God is like some sort of weird craftsman that creates the forms, and that's where it gets really batshit crazy.
I think this is another reason why we enjoy philosophy. It's because it's just so, you'd never think about it. You would never think on your own that, oh, somewhere there is another world where there's the perfect form of everything, but we're just trying to replicate it. Why would anyone think that? And that's why I think it's so interesting to try and, at the very core, to observe it and then maybe appreciate it, maybe, argue against it. I think that's why philosophy remains such an important and enjoyable subject.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely.
I think on that note, we'll say goodbye. And thank you to old Rosie for getting us pissed. Cheers.